Hello, and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. Today's podcast number 1802. The topic is training, and the title is The Benefits of Isometrics and How to Implement Them. Ooh. So we're actually going to talk about isometrics in regards to rehab and injury prevention, in regards to strength, both absolute strength and relative strength, muscle building, muscle endurance, cardiovascular endurance, and mobility. So we got a lot to cover, but we're going to cover kind of quickly. An isometric, what is that? An isotonic contraction or an isotonic exercise is what we're used to. That's regular weightlifting. Think of a bicep curl. You curl the weight up, you curl the weight down. You're moving. So it's a muscular contraction against a weight load where the muscle shortens and lengthens under that same weight load. So if I pick up a 30-pound dumbbell and I do a bicep curl, it's 30 pounds as I'm contracting. It's 30 pounds as I'm extending. That's an isotonic exercise. An isokinetic exercise it's usually a specialized machine. It's the same rate of speed. So you're going to move at the same rate regardless of how much force you apply. So let's say the bicep curl, we're going to count 1, 2, 3 on the way up, and 1, 2, 3 on the way down. That machine will hold you to a 3-count pace up and down, regardless of how hard you would push. I was first introduced to this when I hurt my shoulders in football when I was in high school. I messed up my shoulders. I popped both of them out of place in a football game. Really wicked experience. Very weak. Lots of stuff went wrong with that. But one of the machines they put me in was an isokinetic rotator cuff machine, and it would measure the force that I could apply to the machine. And the point of rehab was, at the beginning of rehab, I was moving at a constant pace, but maybe I was only able to apply, say, 5 units of force. Now, they had specific measurements, but we're going to skip that stuff. Then by the end of training, all of a sudden, maybe I could apply 10 units of force or 12. So it was a way to have the speed and the resistance kind of being consistent, but then my force applied to that resistance was able to be measured, which would then indicate the healthiness of the tissues. If they could apply more force, they were then stronger. Kind of makes sense. Then we have an isometric. An isometric exercise is a muscular contraction without movement. So I'm performing a contraction, but I'm not able to move the object. Now, there's going to be a little bit of gray area that we're just going to let happen in today's podcast. We're going to talk about an isometric where we just choose to stop, and we're flexing the muscles as hard as we can, but we're choosing to stay in the same position. Also, we're going to talk about isometric exercises in which you're literally trying to move the object as hard as you possibly can, but you just physically can't. So one is a voluntary hold of position, and one is an involuntary hold of position. We're just going to lump them together and call them isometrics. Now, the benefits of this is immense. For injury and rehab, I use isometrics all the time with clients. Absolutely all the time. You can use this to strengthen connective tissues with absolutely significantly reduced muscle damage. This is extremely important whenever there is a connective tissue injury. You can actually stimulate the healing and working aspects of the connective tissue, but not annihilate the muscle in the process, not cause a bunch of inflammation. It really helps you kind of control the stimulus. I remember when I tore the meniscus of my knee, I was showing somebody how to sumo deadlift, and I was telling them not to rotate their knees in, as that can cause knee problems. And as I rotated my knee in to show them, stupid, yes, I felt a slice and then this hot sensation in my knee, and, well, crap, I tore my meniscus. So I used isometric holds on our leg extension machine to rehab my knee. What I found was it was somewhere in the middle range of motion, but towards the top half of the middle part of the range of motion, that my knee had a lot of trouble going through that part of the range of motion. It felt very weak and it felt painful. So I did isometrics at the bottom of the movement and I did isometrics at the top of the movement. And as I could hold, say 180 pounds, I would then say, okay, instead of the very tippy top of the range of motion, can I come 1 inch lower and hold that? Instead of the very bottom of the range of motion, can I contract into the motion 1 inch and hold that? I slowly lowered the range of motion gap over time while maintaining a certain amount of weight load that I would like to have held. So maybe when I first started in a certain part of the range of motion, 40 pounds felt miserable and really challenging. Then all of a sudden I got to 60, got to 80, then say my goal was 100. Once I got to 100, I would try to shorten that gap again. It helped me immensely. I ended up squatting 500 pounds for 5 reps after that injury, so it didn't hold me back. I was able to rehab that. Now, I've used isometrics to rehab with clients with torn biceps, pecs, hamstring injuries, a lot of things. People come to me and then they say, you fixed so-and-so, can you fix me? Or they'll think they have to give up lifting, and I'm like, hold on, let's not do that yet. And then we use isometrics as part of our recovery process to really help heal the injuries. One of the main things is, like, when people, like I've had somebody had tore their legs. They tore both hamstrings, both sides of the hamstrings, left leg and right leg. And they were very nervous about eccentric loads on squatting. They felt like that was a huge risk for them. So we started doing isometric holds to help them feel okay with that. They had, they trained in a foreign country, but they had access to Rogue exercise equipment, and they had various blocks that we were able to kind of stack up. And what we did was I had them unrack the weight. Now, when we first started, we did dumbbells and Smith machine and stuff, but eventually they wanted to get back into powerlifting. So they actually ended up hitting an all-time total PR after their injury, better than they ever had before the injury. So what we did was we had them unrack the bar, step back, and they would go down and they would have a box set up, and I'm just making up numbers, say, 6 inches into the range of motion of squat. So they would go down until they felt like their skin, or like the pants they were wearing, the shorts they were wearing, touched the box. But they would try to maintain 100% of the weight load on themselves. They would just feel the box. And then they would hold. Then they would sit into the box and then stand back up. The concentric, oddly enough, was not the problem. The eccentric was where they had a lot of stress and lack of confidence. So we held that, where they maybe did, 4-inch range of motion squat with a hold at a certain weight load. Then we moved to a 6-inch, then 8-inch, then, 10-inch, then parallel. But the idea is you can use progressive loading phases, loading ranges of motion, like ROMs, range of motion, ROM. You can use increasing ROMs as loading isometrics, which really helps you work eventually through the full range of motion. So then all of a sudden they can go through the full range of motion, the full eccentric, and not have the confidence issues. So very helpful, lots of good stuff there. Then for strength, you can use isometrics all the time. People do this all the time. Pin squats, pin pulls, like pin deadlifts, whatever you want to call it. Isometrics are great for recruiting greater amounts of muscle fibers. So typically our body will just fire off the muscle fibers it needs to get the job done. If you want to challenge the body to contract and recruit greater number of fibers, get the body used to doing that, get it to realize that it actually can do that, isometrics are a great opportunity for that. So one example would be deadlifts. You can set up deadlifts with an isometric. You can either just load it with more weight than you can lift, or you can set it against pins in a squat rack or power rack. The idea is you set it where it cannot move, and you want to set it at the range of motion that's either immediately off the floor, like 1 or 2 inches off the floor, or related to it, the weakest position for you. You would then pull on that thing, and typically the time ranges are going to vary a little bit, but I like usually between a 3 count up to a 6 count. So you're going to pull 3, 2, 1, relax, or up to 6. So pull 3, 2, 1, and then you count to 6 because I started at 3. So let's go with 6. Okay, so you'd pull 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Then you relax. A 6 count is horrible when you're doing a true isometric effort, where you're just trying to like rip the rack up out of the ground. People do this with bench press as well. But when you're trying to go like a full force 100% contraction and you're doing that for 6 seconds, it's going to feel like eternity. But we usually use between 3 to 6 counts. And then we would typically, you can do that as its own exercise, or you could do that actually as a priming exercise for the main movement. So maybe your 1 rep max on deadlift is 405. So you have 385 on the bar, and you want to work on your top end strength. If you pull 385 now, it's probably going to feel really slow. Maybe you're going to have some technique breakdown because it's so close to your max. Well, if you do an isometric pull for 3 count, so 3, 2, 1, then you walk over, set up, and then pull the 385, you'll oftentimes you'll find it moves a hell of a lot faster than you thought. By priming the movement with an isometric, you get greater muscle recruitment in that very following effort of movement. This is why people will do explosive jumps before deadlifts or squats. So they might do an explosive box jump and then walk over and do a front squat. The muscle recruitment is greater in an isometric exercise or that box jump. So what it's going to do is it primes your body to recruit those fibers again. So then all of a sudden when you go move the heavier weighted item that you actually want to move, that you can move, you're going to move a little bit faster than what you did before doing the isometric. So it's a really cool kind of way to play with that. I've had clients do this all the time. We use various stimuli like this. We do like walkout holds for squats. It's not technically an isometric exercise, but if you walk out, like say your max effort, well, let's say you're going to a powerlifting meet and your opening attempt, let's say, is 325. Well, if you unrack and walk back with 365, hold it for 10 seconds, walk it back in, rack it, and then you go to your opening attempt at 325, it's going to feel like a feather because you just picked up something even heavier. So your body adjusted to the expectation of 365, but yet you only pick up and you move 325. It actually feels easier than you anticipated it feeling, which is different than what we normally do in our warm-ups. We get progressively heavier, so everything feels slightly heavier than what it did the last time. So the body's always trying to catch up to the weight that you're moving and what it can expect. So by doing a heavy walkout hold beforehand, it actually gets your body ahead of where you are, and then that actually helps make it easier by priming the CNS. So it's really kind of neat components that you can do. You can also do this with relative strength. So absolute strength is the heaviest thing that you can move, regardless of how much you weigh. Relative strength is how much you can move yourself, kind of regardless of how much you weigh. But relative strength is relative to your body weight. Absolute strength is just what's the heaviest thing that you can move. So for relative strength, we can do body weight squat holds. You know, if you squat to the bottom of a squat, body weight squat, but stay active. Don't just like sit into the stretch of the muscles. Stay 1 inch above that. So you want to have an active hold. If you try to hold that for 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, you're going to die. And that can help increase your relative strength, your ability to hold your body weight in end ranges of motion or in weak ranges of motion. You can do this with pull-up holds, push-up holds, a lot of other types of exercises as well. Then we have muscle building. You can use isometrics to build muscle. That is absolutely a possibility. It's not something that people do often, but it is something that you can do. And for example, I did a workout recently where I mixed in isometrics with full range of motion on the leg extension machine. The machine I was on had a stopper in which it would actually stop you at any point in the range of motion that you chose, and you would hit against it, and you could really contract as hard as you could against this stopper, and then you would like come back down to the start of the motion, come back up, push into the stopper as hard as you possibly could for 3 counts, come back to the bottom, and then it had a quick release of the stopper, so you could actually quick release it and then do full range of motions following it. So it was actually really, really fun, really cool way to kind of tear up the muscles. The benefit of that is it increases muscular fatigue and muscular stress, which then leads to increased muscular growth. Now, typically an isometric contraction is stronger than an isotonic, meaning the full range of motion repetitions. So you can do them after normal reps. So maybe you do 10 reps and then you hold the last one for 5 to 10 seconds. Or like I did, I actually was using them first to specifically fatigue my outer quads. So I was actually setting the stopper within the first 1/3 of the range of motion, which is quad sweep specific. So I was pre-fatiguing my quad sweep, so that way as I went into the full range of motion repetitions, the quad sweep would actually get further damaged and be already pre-exhausted into that full range to just help push them further into muscular failure to get a better growth response in those. So it's really fun. You can blend this stuff in a lot of unique ways. Then you can also improve mind-muscle connection using isometric contractions. You can do isometric holds either at the first rep or at the last rep to help get a feel for what muscles feel like. So for example, a lot of people struggle to feel their back muscles. You can do a seated cable row, pull the first repetition back and hold it for 10 seconds. What you might find is at first you're holding it in your biceps, but then as you lift your rib cage up, you think of squeezing your shoulder blades together, all of a sudden now you feel your back ignite. And you're like, holy crap, my back is like dying. Now that you have that set in the very first repetition, you would slowly release tension, like allow yourself to be in a full range of motion, full extension, and then re-find that feeling of the back contracting in the next repetition. So you use an isometric hold on the first repetition to get a feel for what muscles should be contracting and what muscles should be responsible for the weight load. Then, now that you have that in your mind, you have that mind-muscle connection, you try to find that same feeling on the remaining repetitions. So it's a really cool way to improve mind-muscle connection. It's a cool way to improve muscular fatigue, which helps towards muscle building. Then we have the goal of muscular endurance. This is similar to relative strength increase, is you just get into a weird position and you just hold it for a long time. One of my examples I like doing this with is you can do a split squat hold, where somebody just gets into a split squat. So get into a lunge, but remain 1 inch off the ground. Like your back knee should be 1 inch off the ground. So you're actively holding yourself in this weird lunge position. Horrible on its own. Then we typically add in other movements to give your brain something to focus on other than the pain. So I'll have somebody sit into a split squat hold, like a lunge hold, and then they have to do a 1-arm overhead press. Now that is pretty wicked. It's going to really help increase muscular endurance in your legs as your brain is preoccupied with the overhead press. So yeah, you're going to build your shoulder some and your upper back and postural stability, your core as well, but that leg endurance is going to go sky high by having to hold that position. So you want an active hold somewhere in the middle of a range of motion or the end range of a motion, and then you want to hold that for time. And that'll help increase muscular endurance. Cardiovascular endurance, pretty easy peasy. Just at the end of doing something that gets you out of breath, that is a contraction or movement, you would add a non-movement. So maybe at the end of like a muscle cardio circuit, let's say I want to work on cardiovascular endurance. So I'm going to do sled pushes and sled pulls, but at a moderately light weight. So it's my aerobic is the problem, not that my muscles are the problem. So you might have somebody do a sled push for 100 feet, then drag the sled backwards for 100 feet, and then you would have them sit into a partial squat position. They would have to hold that for 30 seconds. Then you get them into a mid-range of motion push-up hold. Hold that for 30 seconds. And then get into a plank and have them hold a plank for 30 seconds. They're going to hate you if you have them do this. But what's interesting is as one set of muscles fatigue, you move to a new set of muscles. So as I would go from a bodyweight squat hold to a push-up hold, I'm switching from my legs being a problem to my chest being a problem, but I'm still having to breathe. I'm still having to actively, metabolically fuel those muscular contractions. Then if I get into a plank, like maybe a plank from your elbows, so you let your arms take a break, but now your core has to contract and hold. So you're perpetuating the aerobic component while switching the muscular stress loads. This is going to help push the cardiovascular endurance aspect of that sequence while allowing the muscle fatigue to not be the ultimate limiter. That's definitely going to be annoying, and they're going to get strained from it. But you can make your cardiovascular be the limiter rather than your muscular endurance. And then for mobility, isometrics are great. Muscles get tight when they're weak. Often muscles get tight and they prevent full range of motion because they can't physically support that full range of motion. So if you get into an active hold at the end range of a motion and then hold that for time under an isometric contraction, it will strengthen that part of the range of motion specific to the positions of those muscles, and that'll improve available movement in that range of motion between workouts and leading into the next workout. So it can actually improve your mobility by doing isometrics in weak positions of certain movement related positions, such as like hips and posture and core. So there's a lot, absolutely a lot. This was probably way too long and too much to cover in one podcast. But if you like the idea of today's podcast and you're like, hey, would you spend more time talking about muscle building and isometrics, or would you spend more time with strength and isometrics? Let me know. I'll make a follow-up podcast. I'd love to dive deeper if there's any interest in it. So just let me know if you're interested. If you have any questions, my email is brutalirongym@gmail.com. If you like the podcast, please share the podcast. If you like the podcast, please consider donating to support the podcast, which you can do on our website. Also, if you like the information we share in the podcast, you can find more from us on our social media channels. You can find us and follow us on Instagram and YouTube under the name Brutal Iron Gym. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.